Morning. So we're going to do, today we'll be doing the second lecture on chapter 8. And I sent out a announcement, I don't know, half an hour ago with with a spreadsheet. So if you've got that available and you can run that kind of simultaneously with what we're doing today, that'll probably be helpful. I will be working off of that spreadsheet for most of today's class. Let me see. So just a couple of quick admin announcements. The exam, the online exam is tonight at 7 p.m. It is, excuse me, it is 25 multiple choice questions. You'll have, if you're taking it, you'll have 90 minutes to take the exam. If you have special allowances for time, I will try to make those adjustments. I think I can do that once the exam starts, and I can give you the additional time you're supposed to get. If you have questions about the exam, I'm not sure if any of you are taking it. Any people who are currently sitting here are taking it. If you have questions about the exam, I will stay on after the lecture today to answer them. So hang on if you're taking it tonight and you've got a question for me. Hang on after we're done with today's material. Okay, so chapter 8. Last time we talked a lot of theory about budgeting, and all that stuff is important and you should understand it. We're going to do the technical stuff today, and there's the book, you can drill down, meaning you can go for more and more and more detail with this kind of budgeting approach. I'm kind of cutting it off at a fairly high level because I think it's adequate for you to get the concept of variance analysis, which is the main focus of the chapter. So when you go to do the homeworks, I've told it's not all of the problems like it normally is. I've cut off a bunch of kind of the more detail level problems, just because I don't think that's particularly useful. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to sneeze first, and then we're going to go ahead and switch to looking at this spreadsheet that I sent out. I'm going to just pause for a second. So I can. Sorry, you didn't want to hear me blow my nose anyway. Okay, so so when we build a budget, we're going to build the budget like I talked about last time. We're going to build the budget in advance of the year, the fiscal year that we're working with. And when we build that budget, we're building it all on assumptions, right? We're building it on historical observations of how we did things in the past, but we're also building it on all that detail that we said our marketing department was going to go out and try to gather for us about changes in demographics, changes in policy, changes in expected reimbursement rates. All those things get pushed into the projections, the projected budget for the coming fiscal year. We call that projected budget the static budget. And I'm not sure what the history of the wording is, but that's what it's called. And so the static budget takes so this little notation I made down here is basically the static budget takes the expected volume, VE, that's what that stands for. VE stands for volume expected, times the price expected, right? So the expected price, and where I'm using price here to refer to either for revenues, the revenue per visit or the revenue per scan or whatever, and on the flip side for price, the cost per per visit in terms of total variable cost, the cost per, you could think of it as the cost per hour for labor, the cost per unit for supply, whatever you want to think of it, just the price either that the organization is getting or the price that the organization is paying for the product that it's working with. So this column, the static column, is all about projections. So this is the thing, like if our fiscal year is starting January 1st, this is the budget that the board is going to pass sometime in December, approving, yes, okay, management, you've made these estimates, we concur with them, you may now proceed with this budget. And then at the end of the year, of course, or really after the end of the year, we get the final actuals, right? So the actual budget is what actually happened over the course of the year. And a lot of times, and I say, you know, not just at the end of the year, but like sometime after the end of the year, we'll have all the data to construct historically what happened over the course of the year, right? So we won't know all the collections and all the, you know, until often a couple of months after the end of the year, but we'll have a pretty good idea as we roll into the end of the year. Sometime, you know, a month or two after the end of the year, we've got a, you know, a 99% picture of what actually happened. Anyway, so we have the actual, so we have the static budget. That's the budget prior to the you know, prior to the beginning of play, if you will, right? So the game hasn't started yet. This is what we think is going to happen. The actual is retrospective, meaning we're looking back historically what actually happened. So we've got those two budgets, and I'm putting them side by side. Now, obviously, when we create the static budget, we don't know the actual budget, right? Because the actual budget doesn't occur until a year later. We don't, well, not that it doesn't occur. We don't have the data to build this column. I'm putting them both here for now, just to kind of be able to talk about them together. So in reality, if you were building a budget, you would have column C, and that's it, right? You would have this. You would not know this yet. So let's just bear that in mind as we kind of look at. So now let's start to look at the static budget or static projections. This first section of the budget, basically from here down to here, is referred to as the statistics budget. I didn't put that in. So statistics budget. I can wrap that. Or better yet, yeah. So the statistics budget refers to the numerical estimates that we're using for the rest of our budget. And so that is here. Yeah, okay. So just to here. So statistics budget is this section where we have numerical values that we're using to estimate things. So we have some number of capitated lives. So this organization, this nominal organization we're working with, has a mix of capitated patients, meaning patients whose insurance company pays us a per member per month fee to provide some amount of kind of care to their patients. So maybe this is a outpatient clinic and we've contracted with the insurance company to provide all of their outpatient care. And so we have some number of capitated lives that we're going to be caring for. And we have estimated that their utilization rate, and this was a thing that we talked about on the last exam, how often are they going to utilize our services? And so the average patient is going to use us 0.18 times per month. So obviously you can't have 0.18 of a visit, right? You can't have 20% of a visit. You have to have a whole visit. So we can estimate, so from that though, we can estimate the number of visits that we will generate from our capitated patients. So if we just take 0.18, so the way, and I'm gonna talk a little bit of Excel here, and I'm gonna kind of assume you have a very little knowledge. So if I want to do a formula in Excel, I just highlight the cell where I want to put the formula. And to do a formula, the first thing you do is you type the equals sign. This tells Excel, I'm going to put in here, I'm not going to hard code in a number. I am going to put in a formula that I want Excel to do something with. So in this case, I'm going to take the 0.18 utilization rate per month, I'm going to click on it, and you can see in the cell, this is called a cell, these little boxes are called cells. In the cell now, I have the reference address for the utilization rate per month number. So that's C6. That's how we refer to cells in Excel. We look at the column, letter, and then the row number. So cell C6 refers to that 0.18. And I'm going to multiply it by 12 because I'm curious to see how many visits per year do I think my patients are actually going to have. So in this case, I'm estimating that I'm going to have 2 visits per year. And if we think that that's not exactly 2, we can add some decimals. I'm going to turn this into a comma style. So actually, we expect to have 2.16 visits per year for our patients. So what I did to change the formatting was I went up to here where it said comma style, and I changed the formatting of the cell so that it gives me 2 decimals. I can add more decimals by clicking on this add decimals number. Now I don't need it. First of all, 2.16 appears to be exactly 2.16, but I also don't need that level of granularity. So I'm just going to leave it at 2.16. I'm just showing you some stuff. So that tells me how many visits per year I'm going to have for my capitated patients. But that's not actually what I want. What I want here is the total number of visits for my capitated patients. So I'm going to add to my formula. Right now I have C6, which is this cell. You can't see it right now, but C6 is that cell, the utilization rate, times 12 to get me the number of months, times the 8,000 patients that I have, right? So I'm now multiplying 0.18 visits per member times 8,000 members. That's visits per month times 8,000 members. That would give me a visits per, and I can eliminate that. So I could get a visit, I could look at it this way too. So I would expect 1,440 visits per month, right? But there are 12 months in the year, so I'm going to do times 12. And that gives me 17,280 visits per year. So that's the number I really want to know because I'm doing an annual budget. And so you need to kind of, as you do things like this, you need to pay attention. Is this rate, in particular when you're working with rates, is the rate at the right time frame for me? So this rate is a per month rate. So you need to make sure that you convert the per month rate to the appropriate, in this case, annual rate. Could conceivably be doing a quarterly rate. You could be doing a semi-annual rate, right? In this case, we care about the annual rate. And here is an example, right? So I have 17,280.00. I don't really care about the 0.00. I'm just going to get rid of those zeros. There's nothing wrong with having the extra zeros, but we try to make things look neat when we create reports for our, for leadership. And so, if you don't need decimals, like you're working with something like 17,000, you don't really care about the 0.02, that might be, in there. So that's a projection. So our projection for the number of visits for capitated patients that we're going to have is based on the number of capitated lives and the utilization rate. And that gives us an annual utilization or an annual number of visits that we expect from our capitated patients. Then we have made a estimate of our fee-for-service, FFS, fee-for-service patients who are going to be using the clinic. So now we have the 2 kinds of patients that will be coming to our clinic from a revenue perspective. The capitated patients and the fee-for-service patients. So now we can just add those 2 together to get the total number of visits that we project. So I'm going to say equals, and you can do this kind of 2 ways. One way is you can just say, well, 17,280 plus the It's making me see C7 plus C8. You can't see C8 because of the way Excel is working. I'm adding them together to get 52,280. There is also, instead of doing that, I can type in the formula equals sum, and then I can highlight the two cells. So it's telling me to sum C7 to C8. That's what the colon means. So I can just use that sum function there. Either one of those is fine. And you're saying, well, why would I bother doing the sum function? Well, you might do the sum function if you had a longer list than just two things, right? So with just two things to add together, it's easy enough to be C7 plus C8. But what if I wanted like the sum of the whole column? You know, and this is kind of meaningless, but what if I wanted to add all four of these numbers? Well, that makes it a lot faster to just highlight all four. Now, it's kind of meaningless to add those things together because you're adding apples and oranges. But I just want to demonstrate, like if you had a whole row of things, you had 25 numbers, rather than doing 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus going on down, you can just use the sum function. So sum and like so. Okay, so 52,280 is the total number of visits. So this is a relatively simple organization. Basically just has visits, and we are dividing those visits into two types of visit. We are dividing them into capitated visits and fee-for-service visits, but we also want to know the total, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. So let's pause, and if you've got your spreadsheet up, go ahead and fill in the actuals. I'll give you 30 seconds, a minute to do that. So do the same thing over here to follow along with me, and then I'll give you a minute to do it, and then I'll do it. Okay. So the number of visits for capitated patients, remember, is the number of capitated lives times the utilization rate times 12. And that's going to be the actual utilization turned out to be 15,744. So what happened? Well, what actually happened was we wound up with 200 more capitated lives. We add a nice comma to make that look pretty. We actually wound up with 8,200 capitated lives. So we thought we were going to have 8,000. We actually wound up with 8,200. Our utilization rate, so we had more patients, but our utilization rate was lower than expected. Now, is that good news or bad news, given that these are capitated patients?
Good news.
And why is it good news?
Because you have more revenue coming in because you have more lives covered, but your utilization rate is lower, meaning you're spending less on them.
Right. So when I have more capitated lives, I'm reimbursed on a per member per month, so a per life basis, right? So this means that we earned more money in terms of revenue because we had the more lives we have, the more money coming in. And then if we had a lower utilization rate, that means that they used these capitated patients used fewer visits, which means we didn't have to spend as much money on them. So we have a fixed amount of revenue coming in, but we have a variable amount of cost in terms of number of visits. So that means that we had a pretty good year with our capitated patients, because the goal of capitation is to reduce utilization, right? One of the reasons that the ACA is so big on risk-based reimbursement, meaning, aiming towards something like capitation, is to try to reduce the amount of medical utilization in the country. largely because it's, we probably overuse our medical resources. Okay, so now we have our estimate for our capitated patients, and we have a lower number of visits for our capitated patients, and we have a lower number of visits for our fee-for-service as well. Is that good news? What do you guys think? Somebody other than Caitlin. Is it good news for the clinic to have fee-for-service, to have estimated 35,000 fee-for-service visits and have gotten 33,000 over the course of the year? Is that, if you're the practice manager, are you happy about that or are you sad about that? What do you think?
That would be bad, right?
That would be bad. Why is it bad?
Because with fee for service, you make money with more visits. More visits is better.
Exactly. So with fee for service, you're getting paid per visit. So if you estimated you were going to get 35,000 visits and you only got 33,000 visits, that means you brought in 2,000 less visits, and therefore you would expect to have brought in 2,000 times whatever you charge per visit, less in revenue, right? But we'll get to that in just a moment. So now we want to have our total visits, so we're just going to do sum again and add those two together. And so we projected 52,280 visits. We actually had 48,744 visits. And that's a mixed blessing, right? So we want more fee-for-service visits and fewer capitated visits. We wound up with fewer of both. So that's kind of a mixed blessing based on what's happening. Okay. So now we're going to go to the revenue budget. And the revenue budget is the portion of the budget where we project our revenues. And so let me just, so we have estimated that we are going to have 75 reimbursement for fee-for-service visits of $75 per visit. Then we look at, we expected to have 35,000 visits. And if I highlight this, as you build an Excel sheet like this, if you've got numbers up above or someplace else in the sheet, a good idea is to reference those numbers rather than hand jam them in. And why would that be? Well, I'll show you in just a second, right, to show you the effects. So our fee-for-service revenue, right, is simply price times quantity. So our price was 75 per visit times our quantity. If Excel does that to you, you can use, I'm using my my up key to pick the cell. So I want to take the C12, the price per visit times the number of visits. And you can also, by the way, you can see up here the formula in the formula bar. So 75 times 35,000 gives me 2.625, 2.6 million, roughly. Okay, so I was saying a minute ago, if you program in, if you've got one reference point to hard code a number in, like 35,000 visits, and what's great about Excel is once you build a sheet like this, you can go change your assumptions, right? So if you said, you know what, maybe it won't be 35,000, maybe it'll be 36,000. I can change the 35,000 to 36,000 just in one place. So I can change that to 36,000. It changes the total number of visits because I programmed it, right? And then it also, you notice, changed the total fee for service. So I'm going to change that back now. But I want to make that point that it's useful that when you build a sheet like this, particularly if you're going to use it for what we refer to as modeling purposes, if you can program your assumptions into like one place and then you just refer back to them, if you want to make a change about your assumptions later on, then it automatically populates your model again. Right, so that's really valuable to think about rather than hand jamming in 35,000 down here, 35,000 here, right? And we get down to variable costs. You got to program in 35,000 down there, you know, blah blah blah. It just saves you time, and it makes this just a really valuable tool. Okay, so then we have so that's our fee for service, our expected fee for service revenue. If we go down here to the capitated portion, we have 8,000, we expected to have 8,000 capitated lives. We're going to receive a payment of $20 per member per month, right? And again, that's a per member per month, so that means that's a monthly rate. And we want the capitated rate for the year. What are we going to do? Sorry, not the capitated rate, but the total capitated revenue for the year. What are we going to do?
Are you going to multiply it by 12?
You're going to multiply what by 12?
Are you going to multiply the 8,000 times 20 times 12?
Perfect. 8,000 times 20 times 12, right, gives me 1920. So I'm going to have 8,000 capitated lives times 20 would give me, what is that, 160,000 per month. But then I'm going to earn that 160,000 12 times. And so I get 1.92 million, right? And so I'm going to go over here and repeat the same process. I'm going to take 77 times 33,000. As it turns out, okay, so let me back up a second. As it turns out, we had reimbursement of $77 per month, even though we had 33,000 visits. So we had a slightly better reimbursement rate, even though we had a lower number of visits. Now here's another trick you can do. I have this formula, C12 times C13 over here. I can highlight that cell, and I can use the Control C, you know, copy function. So I can do Control C, and then I can click here, and I can do Control V, which is the paste function. And you can also do, you know, you can go up here and use the cut and paste functions here, whatever you're comfortable with. But I can just paste the formula in here, and you'll notice it was C12 times E12, sorry, C12 times C13. Now it's E12 times E13. So what Excel does is it takes the formula and it updates it to say, I'm looking to multiply the cell immediately above this cell times the cell one more above that. And so it changes the references, right, when I copy the formula over. So that makes my effort faster. If I'm repeating things like repeating formulas, I can just cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste. Well, copy and paste rather than cut and paste, copy and paste. And so I can do the same thing down here, right? I've programmed in 12, like Saffron said, 12 times the number of capitated lives times the per member per month rate. So I can just take that formula and copy it and paste it over here. So go ahead and do that on your sheet if you haven't already. And so now we have the revenue that's expected to come in from the fee-for-service side of the business, as well as the capitated side of the business. And so now to get total revenue, we're just going to add those two things together. And so we're going to add this plus this. And our total revenue, our expected total revenue is 4.5 million. And we could just copy, so we can just copy that formula over here. And we can see that our actual revenue wound up being 4.5 million, so a little less. And what we're going to do is kind of explore, where did that come from? Was it due to a change in price? Was it due to a change in volume? Where did that come from? So we'll explore that in our variance analysis here in just a minute. Another way you could do this, so I did E18 plus E14. Another way you could do this is you can use the sum function. You don't have to have the cells for the sum function to be adjacent. So what I demonstrated a minute ago was just highlighting a bunch of cells and having it add together. Obviously, that's a meaningless number. But what I can do is say sum, and then I hold my control button down, and I can click on numbers that I want. And you can see what it does. Instead of having, when I had continuous cells, it put a colon there between the beginning cell and the ending cell. If you want to use the sum function to add non-continuous cells, you just hold down the control key and you click on all the cells you want, which is another nice trick if you are working. If you're just doing like 2 numbers, it's fine. But if you're adding together like 5 numbers and they're kind of like all over the place, this is a useful trick to keep in mind. So either way it'll work. With just 2, when you're just adding 2 cells together, it makes little difference what you do. Okay. So that's our revenue budget, right? And ultimately what we're trying to get at with the revenue budget is the total revenue for the static budget. So this was our projected revenue for the year. The actual is what we actually earned over the year. And obviously we don't know the actual. Again, I'm going to say that again. We don't know what the actual is going to be when we're writing the static. The next section is the cost budget. Right? This is where we focus on costs. So we have a couple of component costs that go into our estimate. We're estimating that our labor is going to be 1.7 million and our supply cost is going to be 627,000. And so our total variable cost is going to be the sum of our supply cost and our labor cost. So it's just a simple addition here. And so those are the 2 variable costs that go into producing our visits. And so we can take that formula and copy it over here, and we can see that our static budget, our static cost budget, expected 2.32 million. We actually wound up spending 2.34 million. And we can kind of eyeball and see, well, labor went up and supply cost went up. Now, we could get more granular, and I'm choosing not to do that. And this is what I said at the beginning. You could get more granular with this, and we could say our labor would be number of FTEs, right? Number of full-time equivalents, times the number of hours, times FTEs, or I guess hours worked, either one would work, times the rate, so the rate per FTE or the rate per hour, right? And that would give you more granularity, and you could say, okay, how did labor costs change? Did it change because we're using more hours or more FTEs, or did it change because we're paying more per hour or per FTE? And we could get into that level of granularity. We're not going to do that today, but in some of the problems, they dive down into that level of granularity. Same with supplies. You could say, we have a cost per unit for supplies, some, I don't know, sponges or paper we're using on the tables or whatever, and we'd have a cost per unit, so like a cost per foot or a cost per sponge, and then we'd have the number of sponges. And so we could get into did the supply cost change because of an increase in the number of sponges we used, or because the cost per sponge went up, or both, right? Or maybe they went in opposite directions. And so we could dig into that level of granularity. Again, not going to do that today, but just keep that in your head, that we can kind of just keep drilling down into more and more detail. Okay, so we have our total variable cost for both the static and the actual. And we're interested, though, we are interested in knowing how did our variable cost per visit change. So we're going to take our total variable cost, right, and divide it by the total number of visits. I'm going to go up here and grab the total number of visits. And so you can see I'm dividing C26, which is the total variable cost, by the total number of visits. Now, why am I picking total visits and say not fee-for-service or capitated, or maybe having two columns or two rows? Is that a meaningful, would that be a meaningful division? Not sure, it's too early in the morning. Okay, so probably not a meaningful division, right? I mean, when a patient comes in, the nurse sits them down, they don't typically say, oh, which insurance are you with? Oh, you're the capitated one. We're going to give you less, less stuff, or we're going to use less medication on you, or we're going to use, we're going to reuse a syringe or something because, we don't make any money. They're not going to do that, right? Hopefully not going to do that. And so really variable cost, right, is totally driven by volume of utilization. And so it doesn't matter what kind of patient or in terms of how their reimbursement works, that doesn't matter. It just matters how many patients we've got. And so we can take that same formula and paste it over here, right? And it takes the total variable cost divided by the actual number of visits. And we can see, eyeballing it, that our cost per visit has gone up between the years, right? We had fewer visits and our total variable cost actually went up. So more costly, fewer visits brings us to a higher variable cost per visit rate. Okay. Fixed cost, that's our stuff like rent, maybe our secretarial staff, other costs that aren't direct, insurance, that aren't directly related to the volume of visits that we're doing. So now we want to know, what's our total cost? Well, our total cost is going to be the fixed costs and the variable costs. So as it turns out, our fixed costs were expected to be 1.8 million. At some point in the course of the year, those changed, and we wound up with fixed costs of 1.75 million. So when we look at the total costs, even though our variable costs went up, our fixed costs went down a bit, and so we were able to, we actually wound up with a reduction in total costs from 4.127 to 4.093. And now we can estimate our profit. And our profit, of course, is just revenue minus expenses or costs. And so now we have our operating budget, both our static operating budget and our actual operating budget. So, so we expected to have a profit of 417,000. We actually had a profit of 415,000. So, so we still were profitable, right? So this company didn't lose money. It just didn't make as much money as it thought it was going to make. So I've given you the answers here. Hopefully they're the same. Yeah. So you can kind of, if you're reviewing this on your own, you can flip across. So now we're going to talk about the flex budget. This is a weird thing that doesn't make a lot of intuitive sense, but it is useful in terms of budgeting. And what it's useful for is it gives us the tool we need to estimate variances, which is what we're going to come to next. So what I've written up here in column E is flex. So the flex budget is this kind of amalgamation, Frankenstein kind of number that mixes together the actual volume, right? The actual number of visits, actual number of scans, actual number of admissions, whatever it is you're working with, times the expected prices. So the expected revenue per visit in this case, the expected cost per visit go in here. So it's a mix of actual and expected. And what's the point? Well, the point is it allows us to isolate the effects of a change in volume or a change in price. And it allows us to focus and say, what caused this variance? What caused the change in revenue? Was it a result of a change in the revenue per visit, or was it a result of the change in the number of visits? And it allows us to calculate the dollar amount effect that it had on the organization, which is a useful number to know, right? Because we can kind of eyeball down here and say, well, yeah, a portion of it, of the revenues changed because we wound up getting reimbursed more. Okay, well, the question then would be, well, how much more? What was the actual effect? And that's what we're going to try to do with the variances. Okay, so we don't do a flex budget for our numeric static, statistics portion of the budget. We just basically leave that alone. So we want to go down to the fee-for-service revenue to calculate the flex fee-for-service revenue. And so to calculate the flex fee-for-service revenue, we're going to take the actual volume, right, of fee-for-service visits, which is 33,000, right, times the expected revenue per visit for fee-for-service, which was 75. And so the flex number for fee-for-service is 2.45 million. So you can see I'm following the formula, a little formula up here. The actual volume, 33,000 and be careful, don't choose total visits, right? You get a weird number, times the expected price, 75. So now we have three numbers going across, and we'll work with that in a minute. But basically, just real quick, right? If I compare the static budget and the flex budget, the static budget has the expected volume and the expected price. The flex budget has the actual volume but the expected price. So we have held price constant and adjusted for volume, right? So if we had been correct about price, how would volume have affected our revenues is what this allows us to do. And so it tells us there's about a $150,000 difference in the amount of revenue we collected as a result of a change in volume. And then we can compare across here. We're going to do this in the variance section in a second. And then we can compare the flex to the actual, and we can say, holding volume constant, because I'm comparing actual volume times price, expected price, to actual volume times actual price, right? So that's the number that comes out of the actual. So they both of these numbers have the actual volume in them. The difference between them is the price used. So in this one, we're using the 75. In this one, we're using the 77. So we can kind of eyeball this one and say, well, whereas we overestimated the amount of revenue we would get based on volume, over here we underestimated the amount of revenue that we would get based on price, right? So we're actually we actually got, what is that, 40 minus 75. We're going to get to it in a minute, but that's what, $64,000 more in revenue came in as a result of the increase in price. Okay, so that's how we're going to use the flex budget number. And my allergies are acting up. All right. So now we're going to do the same. We want to calculate the flex revenue for capitated. Okay, so flex revenue for capitated is actual volume times expected price. So what do we do? What number am I going to put in here? Actual volume times expected price. How do I get, am I going to grab the number of visits for capitated of my actual volume? Yes, no. What drives revenue for capitation? We just calculated it a minute ago. Right? We said it's 8,000 capitated lives times the per member per month payment times 12. So were visits involved in that? No, visits are not involved in that. Good. Okay, so over here we have, right, actual number of capitated lives, actual per member per month reimbursement times 12. No, it doesn't change. So I'll give you a hint. It's going to be something times 12 over here. Okay, so 12. What's the actual volume?
Is it the 8,200?
Exactly, 8,200. And then the price that we get what are the dollars? Times 20, right? So the actual volume was, so volume in the case, so you have to think about this, right? It's not, volume does not automatically translate into visits or discharges or whatever. Volume is whatever the, whatever quantitative number of things that you're being paid for is what volume means. So when we're talking about fee for service, we're being reimbursed per visit. When we're talking about capitation, we're being reimbursed per covered life. So you have to think about, when you're thinking about volume, you have to think about what is it that we're being reimbursed for doing. Is it a service, like every time I crank out a widget, is it that? Or is it in this case, the number of lives that we're being paid for, right? So that's you just got to kind of be flexible about how you think about both the volume and the price, and you've got to be sure you're following the logic of your either revenues or costs. Okay.
Not that it matters in this case because we got the same amount, like PM in the expected and the actual, but like you're supposed to do the 20 from the static budget and then the 820 or 8,200 from the actual, right?
Oh, did I do both? You're right. Shoot, I did. Sure enough. Thank you for pointing that out. It should have been, yeah, it should have been the expected. Thank you. And I got distracted because the numbers were the same. And now you can change that, right? And you can say, well, we thought we were going to get a PMPM, and this is the beauty of Excel, right? Is we thought we were going to get a PMPM of, say, 22, right? And we actually got 20, and things kind of automatically flow through. You see the changes. And that's why I use these relational, where I program it relationally rather than hard coding in the numbers. Okay, so yes, thank you, Caitlin. I'm distracted myself. So this should have been the actual volume times the expected price times 12. So that gives you, and because the price doesn't change, right? The actual price and the static price are the same. When we hold volume constant, you're going to wind up, and we vary price. If price doesn't vary, you wind up with the same number both times. Excuse me. Sneezing this morning. All right. So now we've got the flex fee-for-service revenue, the flex capitated revenue, and so we can add those two together. And we get our flex revenue. Okay, so we're there for that. Now, getting down to cost, we're going to use, since we don't have the granularity for labor and supplies, we're going to use the variable cost per visit to estimate our flex number. So our flex number, variable cost is driven by number of visits. So we're going to use the actual volume. So in this case, what is my actual volume for variable cost? What number am I going to grab? Yeah. Okay, you were waving to somebody. Okay. Thought you were raising your hand. What number am I going to use? So I need actual volume that drives variable cost. What do you think, Allie? You don't know? So I'm going to use total visits, right? I want my total visit, because what drives cost at this clinic? It doesn't matter what status they are with their insurance company. What drives cost, variable cost for this clinic, is every time somebody comes through the door, they're going to use some supplies to take care of those people. So we want the total number of visits. And then, so that's our actual volume. And now we need our price expected. So our price expected, we estimated over here as the cost per visit, the variable cost per visit. Our estimated variable cost per visit is $44.52. Oops. I forgot to put in the, let's try that again. 48,744 visits is our actual number of visits, times our variable cost per visit of $44.52. And so, so when we combine together our expected cost per visit, which was lower than our actual cost per visit, times our actual volume, which was lower than our expected volume, our flex cost would have been 2.1 million. So if we had projected forward using the volume expectation, the actual volume and the variable cost expectations, we would have come up with 2.16 million. And so now we can compare between these and say, all right, and we're going to do this in a second, holding price constant, right? What should our cost have been? Well, if we actually had $44 per visit in cost, and we had our actual number of visits, we should have only had 2.1 million in cost. And if we hold our volume constant at our actual volume, but allowed our price to vary, we should have had 2.1 million. We actually wound up with 2.3 million. So that tells us our cost per visit. The difference here tells us what was the impact of our cost per visit. The difference here tells us what was the impact of the number of visits. Okay. Fixed cost. Actual volume times expected price. Okay, how does that work? What volume do we use for fixed costs? Well, this is a bit of a trick question, so I'll just tell you. Fixed costs are fixed. They don't vary with volume. So it's meaningless to talk about volume. So basically it's one, right? And it's always one. It never changes. And so we're going to be using our expected price versus our actual price. So our expected price was 1 times 1.8 million. Or we had our expected volume was 1 times our expected price of 1.8 million. And here, and so when we take our actual volume, which is also 1 times our expected price, which was 1.8 million, we wind up with 1.8 million. So it's just going to simply be the same. So 1.8 million. So now we can take our total costs, our total flex cost, which is going to be our variable cost, and our fixed costs, and add them together. And we wind up with 3.969 million. And we don't do a flex for profit because we're going to, I'll show you in a minute, it'll make sense. Okay. All right, so that's flex. And if you go here, you've got the answers. And so let's go on now to talk about variances. And this is where you can get ever more granular. Now I have already done, oops, let me get rid of column A. I have done the flex estimates for you guys already, so we can focus just on the variances. So variances, what we're interested with variances is trying to figure out how wrong were we, right? That's really the questions. How wrong were we? And we want to be, if you think about it, do you want to be wrong about profit by getting more profit, or wrong about profit by getting less profit? Does that make sense? So which way do you want to be wrong?
Probably about more profit.
Probably want to be wrong by having more profit than you thought you would have?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's an excellent wrong answer. So that was a trick. That was a trick question. Which would you rather be wrong about? Think about that. Do you want to be wrong at all? No, right? You don't want to be wrong at all. You want to be exactly right. Now, is it better to be wrong with a positive variance towards having more profit than being wrong and having less profit? Yes, it's better to be wrong about having more profit than less profit. But you're still wrong, and that's my point, right? You don't want to be wrong. And why is that? Because you say, well, what's wrong with having more profit than we thought we were going to have? Well, what's wrong with that is you probably didn't provide chances are you are too conservative in your estimates, right? You probably didn't do as much care as you could have done if you had excess profit or more profit than you expected. So if you're, So if you're wrong about profit, even though it's better to be wrong the way that Saffron said, which is, she fell in my trap, it's better to be wrong and have more profit than you thought you were going to have. But being wrong is not the preferred outcome regardless, because what we really want is accuracy. And it's really hard to predict the future. There's all kinds of jokes about, the hardest thing to predict is the future kind of things, right? And so it's very hard to predict the future. But the ideal work that you as a potential analyst want to do is to be as close to correct as possible, right? You don't want to be wrong. Second best is being wrong in a positive way, but being correct is what you really want. All right, so hop off my high horse there. I don't want you to come away thinking it's okay to have a positive profit variance. It's really not, right? You really want to be exactly correct. So let's talk about that first. So the first variance that we're going to look at is the profit variance. This is kind of the highest level variance. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare our actual profit to our expected profit. Now, so let me go up here, and I've written out each of the variances. So the profit variance is the actual profit minus the static profit. So we'll go do that in a second. So we take the actual profit minus the expected profit. Now, why do we do it that way rather than the static profit minus the actual profit? Let's do that real quick. So I'm going to plug in here next to my profit variance. I'm going to take my actual profit minus my static profit. So if you're following along at home, you can do it just like this, minus this. So I subtracted my actual profit minus my static profit, and I wind up with negative 2312. Why not go the other direction? Because if you look down here, you can see I reverse some things. Well, down here. Under cost, we go static minus actual rather than actual minus static. So nobody's going to bite now because I tricked Saffron. You're all going to be like, I'm not falling for that stuff again. So what does this tell us? We have a negative 2,300 profit variance. So if I just tell you, without showing you anything else, if I tell you had a negative 2,300 profit variance, how would you interpret that? What would you tell me that means in terms of what happened in the organization? Yeah, Linnea.
That there was no profit, like the actual profit wasn't what you expected, and it was lower than
it was lower. Exactly. So a negative profit variance tells you that you overestimated your profit and it came in at a number lower. So a negative profit variance tells you not that you didn't make any profit, that you have, be careful with that interpretation. It's not that you had a loss, right? Because they clearly didn't have a loss. They made $415,000. They were wrong about profit, and they were wrong in a negative way, meaning they overestimated the amount of profit they would have. Or another way to say it is actual profit was less than expected profit. Sorry, morning allergies kicking in. All right. So the reason that we go actual minus static is kind of going with what I was saying with we were talking about a minute ago with Saffron, was it is preferable to be wrong and have actual be bigger than static. So it's a positive wrong, but it's still wrong. My point is it's still wrong, but it's preferable right, to have, say, 420 over here, in which case we would have a positive profit variance, right? A positive profit variance tells us the actual profit was bigger than the expected profit. A negative profit variance tells us the actual profit was less than the expected profit. I'm going to undo that. Go back to what we were, right? Okay. So our actual profit was negative 2312. So we made less profit, and this is really important. Remember, it doesn't mean we had a loss. It just means that we didn't have as much profit as we thought we were going to have. So a lot of folks misinterpret that. When I ask them, explain to me what a negative profit variance means. That means they had a loss. No, it just means they were wrong about how much profit they were going to have, and they were wrong in the sense that their expected profit was greater than their actual profit, or you can flip that around and say their actual profit was less than their expected profit. Okay, so now we can start to decompose the different variances. So we can decompose the profit variance into its component parts. Remember, profit, right? Profit is equal to total revenue plus total cost, right? So if we have a negative profit variance, that means that we were either wrong about our total revenue or our total cost, or maybe both, right? So what we want to do now is say, well, how much were we off by on our revenue, right? So is our profit variance wrong because we're wrong about our revenue? Is it wrong because we're wrong about cost? Or is it wrong because we were wrong about both of these things? So the next kind of layer in our analysis is to drill into the revenue variance. Were we wrong about our revenue? Okay. So revenue variance is going to be actual revenue minus static revenue. So I'm going to type in equals over here, and I'm going to go find my actual revenue and my static revenue. So my actual total revenue was 4509. And I'm going to subtract my static revenue, which was 4545. And I find that I was wrong about my total revenue by 36,000. So interpret for me, if I said to you, you had none of the rest of this data, if I said the revenue variance is negative 36,000, what would you know about what happened this year in terms of their static budget and their actual budget? This is not a trick question. So if you're trying to judge how well the organization projected, what happened? You're afraid
Would
to
it
answer.
be that they expected to have more revenue than they actually made?
Exactly. Right. They expected to have 36,000 more revenue than they actually had. That's all this is. So this is not a trick, right? So in the revenue variance simply tells you they were wrong about revenue by 36,000, and because revenue variance is negative, it's a bad out. You can think of it as like a bad outcome. The way we structure this is we want, if we're going to be wrong, we would like to have actual revenue be bigger than static revenue, right? If we're going to be wrong, we would like to have our actual revenue be bigger than our expected revenue. In this case, we were wrong in the wrong direction, right? So you can think about it that way. We were wrong in that we projected 36,000 more actual, we projected 36,000 more static revenue than we actually had actual revenue, okay? So So now we know the profit is wrong, and it was wrong in the bad direction. It was wrong in the sense that we had less than we thought we would have. The total revenue is wrong in the sense that we have less revenue, 36,000 less revenue than we thought we would have. And so just kind of applying some logic here, what does that mean about total cost then? How would we have been wrong about total cost? So if profit equals revenue plus cost, what must be true about our cost variance? Does anybody have an intuition just looking at that? So total profit variance is off by 2,000. Revenue's off by 36,000 and negative. What must cost be, roughly?
Like your costs are more than you expected?
Less, right?
Less.
The costs are going to be less than it because they're going to offset, right? We only had a $2,000 loss on our profit. And so you're processing correctly, just went in the wrong direction. So our costs are going to be, would have had to have been less in order to offset the fact that we were off by 36,000 for our profit. Our cost must have been less. So let's do our cost variance next. So our cost variance, we're going to flip the arrangement now, and we're going to say we're going to have if our static cost is greater than our actual cost, then we're going to have a positive cost variance, right? Why does that make sense? Well, we'd like our actual cost, if we're going to be wrong, we would like our actual costs to come in at less than what we thought they would be. That's what, so if we have a positive cost variance, that means that our actual cost, our expected costs were greater than our actual costs. So let's go see what happens. So we're going to go find our expected costs, our static costs. I'm going to take our expected costs minus our actual costs, and we get a positive 33,000. So that means, so going back there, right? Our total cost, we expected our total cost to be 4.1 million. They were actually 4.09 million. So we spent less to provide the care to our 48,000 visits. We actually spent less than we thought we were going to do. So now we have cost variance of 33,000, positive 33,000, revenue variance of negative 36,000. If I add my variances together, if I add my revenue variance plus my cost variance, you can see that they add back up to my profit variance, which they have to do. So this is when you go to do the these problems, one way to check whether you are doing this correctly or not is, do they add back up? So when I say we can decompose each of these variances into subordinate variances, what I mean is profit variance is really a function of the cost variance and the revenue variance, right? The two of them added together roll back up to be the profit variance. You can break each of these variances down into kind of its component parts, and that's what we're going to do next. Is we're going to say, okay, so and then you can add them back up, and they should add back up to the parent variance, if you will, right? So the profit variance is essentially the parent variance of the revenue variance and the cost variance. So now what we're going to do is kind of the same thing for revenue variance. We're going to say that revenue variance is really a function of volume, meaning the number of visits and or number of capitated lives, or the variance came from changes in price that we received for either, in this case, both the price per visit and the PMPM. And so this number, because we're not, and then we could potentially, then we could break, and we're not going to do this, but we could take the volume variance and break it out into its component parts of how much of it came, how much of the volume variance came from change in volume for our fee-for-service patients, and how much of that volume variance came from a change in the volume of enrolled lives, right? And those are two very different things. We're just kind of, we're aggregating them into this kind of glob here, right? But you could, if you were, you know, really doing this hardcore analysis, you could then kind of continue to break these things out into kind of a progressively more detailed tree, if you will. But we're just going to look at, because we only have 5 minutes, we're going to see if we can finish revenue today, and then we'll pick up with cost maybe next time. So revenue volume variance is how much was our volume off, excuse me, how much was our revenue estimate off as a result of a change in volume. We're going to do flex minus static for volume. And why are we going to do flex minus static for volume? So I'm going to go look for my, that's my cost. I'm going to go look for my flex revenue and my static revenue. So I'll go over here. Flex revenue and static revenue. So I'm going to take flex revenue, which is my actual volume times my expected price, minus my static volume, which is my expected volume on my expected price. So remember, flex volume holds price constant and varies volume, right? And so the difference between these two numbers is a result of a change in the assumed volume, right? Holding price constant. So what this number tells us then is how much was our revenue off as a result of a change in volume. Well, we did, we were off by $102,000 as a result of our change in volume. And most of that, just if you remember, we had an increase in the number of capitated lives, but that is clearly swamped by the effect of a decrease in the number of fee-for-service visits, right? And so we'll see here now, we'll look at, and we'll stop on this one, the price variance. So this is the impact of the price variance. We had actual revenue minus flex revenue. So actual revenue minus flex revenue. So we had a positive impact from a change in price. So holding volume constant, we had an improvement in our outcome as a result of the increased price. And just to refresh, remember that we had no change in capitated life price, right? Our PMPM didn't change, but we had a $2 increase in reimbursement per visit for our fee-for-service patients. So we had we actually earned more than we thought we would in terms of price, but we earned a lot less because of a change in volume. So again, we can aggregate these two subordinate variances, and they add back up to the parent variance. So profit variance broke down into revenue variance and cost variance. And then revenue variance breaks down into volume variance and price variance. Okay. And then next time we'll look at cost variance also breaks down into two subordinate variances. The essentially volume variance, right? The result of a change in volume, and managerial variance, which is the same thing as price variance. We call it managerial variance because we hold our managers responsible for managing the price that we pay per unit for things. And so it's the same math as the price variance. So, all right, we'll stop there for today. So hopefully that made some sense. Oh, I didn't see chats coming in. Would be, oh, yes. 8,000, would it be 8,000? That was the mistake I made earlier, right? I think. Okay. All right, so that's it for today's class. We'll pick up, finish up the cost variance next time. When you do the problems, you shouldn't be having to do problems below cost variance or below the two subordinate cost variances. There are, like I said, there are a whole bunch of, you can drill down even further, but I think for undergraduate class, this is adequate. So we won't go farther than that. Okay, so I'm going to